I hope y'all enjoyed that. I was watching TV one night, and the show was on called When Vacations Attack. And this particular episode was about a family who was on vacation in Australia, and they were camping out on the beach in tents. And it's 3 generations, so there's parents, their kids, and then their grandkids. And one afternoon, they decide that they're going to go out on the ocean in a boat. And so they go out, and they're about 3 miles off the coast, and they look in the water, and they see something. And they're trying to figure out what it is, and they eventually determine that it's a saltwater crocodile. And they estimate that it's about 14 feet long. So that's pretty big. And so they're just looking at it because they'd never seen one before. They think it's pretty cool to see the saltwater crocodile out in the ocean. Eventually they keep going, and they go back to the beach where they're camped. And they go through the rest of their activities for that day. And the next shot is from the crocodile's perspective. And this is based on a true story. But like the camera shot is kind of going in and out of the water like the crocodile's eyes. And you see it getting closer and closer to the shore. And you kind of see it going like this as it's watching the people on the shore. And it starts to get dark outside. And then eventually you see them all go inside. They turn off all the lights, and the only light is from the moonlight shining off the water and on the beach. And then you see this crocodile again, and it's getting closer and closer to the shore. And finally it gets on the sand, and slowly it starts to crawl upon the sand towards their tent. And it's taking its time. It wants to remain undetected, and it's taking its time. And then the camera is shot from within one of the tents. A father wakes up because his little baby girl's crying, and so he's trying to console her. He can't, because he's a guy. Sometimes we can't do that. So he gives it to the mom, and she does it right away. But anyway, he's about to lay back down, and he looks outside his tent, and he sees this massive crocodile head just like 3 feet from him, staring at him. And he jumps back, and as soon as he jumps back, that crocodile just rushes in, and it clamps down on his leg, and it starts to drag him out towards the water. It's about 20 feet away. That crocodile knows that if he gets to the water, that guy can't do anything. He's going to go under the water, and he's going to drown the guy. They're not going to be able to find him out there. If he gets to the water, that guy is his meal. And so that's where he's going, and this guy's screaming and, trying to get away, but he can't. And the people rush out of their tents, his family members. They rush out, and they're beating on this crocodile, doing everything they can. They're trying to pull him out, and they can't do it. And they finally find a little handgun, and they go and press it to the top of the crocodile's head and pull the trigger about 5 feet away from the water. And it kills the crocodile. But that guy was 5 feet away from his death, 5 feet away from going under and losing all hope and his future. 5 feet. That story reminds me a lot of the nature of sin. We're going to be looking at Hebrews chapter 12 this morning, verses 1 through 3. And it says this: "Therefore, since we are surrounded by such a great cloud of witnesses, let us throw off everything that hinders and the sin that so easily entangles, and let us run with perseverance the race marked out for us. Let us fix our eyes on Jesus, the author and perfecter of our faith, who for the joy set before him endured the cross, scorning its shame, and sat down at the right hand of the throne of God. Consider him who endured such opposition from sinful men, so that you will not grow weary and lose heart." We're not sure who the author of Hebrews is, but it seems like he is writing to a group of Jews who have become Christians. And it wasn't necessarily easy to be a Christian back then, especially if you were a Jew, because if you're becoming a Christian too, most of the people you grew up around were probably going to disown you for becoming a Christian. They probably would have viewed you as a sellout to the faith, but they also lived in a world where they were persecuted for being Christians, and not just being made fun of occasionally, but they could have been beaten or imprisoned or even killed because of their faith. And so he's writing to them to encourage them to stand strong, and he compares faith to a race. And races aren't necessarily easy, especially long distance races, but they're hard to finish. And he compares faith to a race, I think, because he knows that faith isn't necessarily easy, and there's going to be times in your faith when you're going to doubt, times in your faith when you might want to quit. And so he says, he's writing this to them to encourage them. He says at the very beginning, therefore, since we are surrounded by such a great cloud of witnesses. That's how he begins this, surrounded by such a great cloud of witnesses. And he's going back to chapter 11. And in chapter 11, he lists a lot of people who had finished this race before. And he starts out by saying in chapter 11, faith is being sure of what we hope for and certain of what we do not see. This is what the ancients were commended for. And so he lists name after name of ancients who did something in their faith. And he starts by talking about Abel. By faith, Abel offered God a better sacrifice than Cain did. By faith, he was commended as a righteous man when God spoke well of his offerings. And we know that Cain, his brother, was jealous of Abel because Cain's offerings displeased God, whereas Abel's pleased God. So he killed his brother. But the author of Hebrews says, and by faith Abel still speaks, even though he is dead. He continues, by faith Enoch was taken from this life so that he did not experience death. For before he was taken, he was commended as one who pleased God. By faith Noah, when warned about things not yet seen, so God warns him that he's going to send this rain upon the earth and it's going to flood. And it had never rained before, and the people didn't know what a flood was. And so they hear these things are going to happen, and Noah believes, and the rest of the world doesn't. But Noah and his family, they are saved because they built this ark, and they're saved through it. But the rest of the world perishes. By faith, Abraham, when called to go to a place he would later receive as his inheritance, obeyed and went, even though he didn't know where he was going. And the neat thing about Abraham's story is that Abraham and Sarah are old when this happens. They had never had children, and they're too old to have children. But God makes this promise to Abraham that through you and your descendants, all the peoples on earth will be blessed. He says, I'm going to make you into a great people. The author of Hebrews puts it this way. And so from this one man, Abraham, and he is good as dead, because when Abraham died, that was supposed to be it for his family. He wasn't supposed to have kids. Through this one man, and he is good as dead, came descendants as numerous as the stars in the sky, and as countless as the sand on the seashore. And we know that God provided him a son, Isaac. By faith, Abraham, when God tested him, offered Isaac as a sacrifice. And so this is the son through whom this promise was supposed to be fulfilled. And God asks him to offer him as a sacrifice. And in faith, Abraham starts to go through with it. And he's going to. But we know that God stops him. He just wanted to know that Abraham trusted God. And the author of Hebrews puts it this way. Abraham reckoned that God could raise the dead. And figuratively speaking, he did receive Isaac back from death. And so by faith, Isaac was able to bless his children, and his children were able to bless their children, and their children blessed their children, and eventually their children ended up in Egypt where they're slaves. And they're growing in size, and the king of Egypt, Pharaoh, becomes concerned that if they grow too numerous, they might want to overthrow us and take over our kingdom. So he orders this decree that any Hebrew baby, any of these descendants of Abraham who are males, they are to be killed when they're born. But by faith, Moses' parents hid him for 3 months after he was born, because they saw that he was no ordinary child, and they were not afraid of the king's edict. So Moses should have died. That should have been it for him, but he didn't. And we know that Moses grows up to become the leader of the Israelites, and he eventually leads them out of Egypt. And throughout this process, a lot of the Egyptians are dying because of the hardness of their hearts and because of how they have turned away from God or despise God. And they're dying, but these Israelites are being saved, and they're being led out of Egypt. And it gets to this point where they're at this Red Sea. They're at the Red Sea, and they can't go forward because they can't get across it. But Pharaoh, his heart hardened, is chasing after them with his army. He wants his slaves back. He wants his source of labor back. But God opens up the waters of the Red Sea, and the Israelites pass through on dry ground. And when Pharaoh and his army follow them, he collapses the water upon them. They die, whereas the Israelites live. And the author of Hebrews goes on, and he demonstrates that there's a correlation between faith and our actions. Abel offered. Enoch pleased. Abraham went. Abraham offered. Each one of these people did something. There's a correlation between faith and our actions. But there's also a correlation between faith and life. Those who had faith, they had a future. And it even says, Abel, even though he's dead, he still speaks. And really, they still have a future to this day. There's a correlation between faith and having a future. And so I wonder, why did he start talking about all these people? And if you go back a little bit to the end of chapter 10, beginning in verse 35, he says, "Do not throw away your confidence. It will be richly rewarded." And he's saying here, keep your faith and you'll have a future. You need to persevere so that when you have done the will of God, you will receive what He has promised. For in just a very little while, He who is coming will not delay. But my righteous one will live by faith, and if he shrinks back, I, God, will not be pleased. And the author says, "But we are not of those who shrink back and are destroyed. We are of those who believe and are saved." And so he talks about all these people who believed and were saved and have a future. And he says, since we are surrounded by these people, since we are surrounded by such a great cloud of witnesses, this is how you can persevere. It wasn't easy for them back then. And it wasn't. But it's not necessarily easy for us today. And just like the author of Hebrews told them, and this is true for us today, it can be done. There are people who have finished the race and they're cheering for us. And hopefully we allow their influence to surround our lives. Hopefully we can take hope from their victory. But it's not easy. Our culture is actually becoming a lot like their culture. Their culture valued tolerance, and that's one of the most esteemed values in our culture. Tolerance. This idea that you have to, you can think whatever you want to think, believe whatever you want to believe, but you can't tell someone else they're wrong when they think differently. You can't tell someone that you're wrong and I'm right, because we violate that value of tolerance. And back then, that's why the Jews were so despised, is because they were so intolerant. They viewed the rest of the world as godless, heathens, pagans, just awful, gross, unclean people. And so the rest of the world despised the Jews because the Jews violated that value of tolerance. Our world values tolerance, and that makes it tricky for Christians. How does the church, how do we claim that we have the way, the truth, and the life without telling other people you're wrong, or without at least seeming like we're violating that value of tolerance? Their world was very pluralistic in the sense that there was many gods that could be worshipped, many worldviews that could be adopted, many ways. And again, you had to be okay with people having different ways and different belief systems. And that's like our world today. There's just a plurality of options, so many voices out there telling us that this is true, and this is true, or this is true, or this is true. It's hard to discern sometimes what is actually true and what isn't. But that's the nature of sin. It deceives. And maybe we think to ourselves, it's 3 miles off the coast. It's 3 miles away. We're going to go back to our camp, and it's going to stay there, and it's not going to affect us. Maybe we think, after looking at this a while, it's not really a crocodile. It kind of looks like one, but it's not. It can't be. That's too big to be a crocodile. It's just a log or a piece of driftwood or something. It can't be a crocodile. And, whatever it is, it's not going to affect me. I'm going to go back to my camp, and everything's going to be okay. Sometimes we don't see sin coming. But maybe we should. Sometimes we don't see it coming, and we should. Maybe we should know if it's right there, it could easily be right here where we're going to be in just a little bit. And And the crazy thing is that sometimes we do see it coming. Sometimes we see sin coming, and we're still not ready for it. And if that happens enough, and we know that it's going to be a struggle, that it's going to clamp onto us and start to drag us out, and that it's going to be a struggle and cause pain, if that happens enough, maybe we'll even get to that point where we're not even going to fight anymore, and we just wade out into that water ourselves, waiting for it to come, because it's going to happen. And we're going to give into it. And so what's the point in even resisting? And it seems hopeless. It seems like there's no future in those moments. The author of Hebrews says that sin hinders and entangles us, that it keeps us from advancing, makes us want to quit, makes us want to stop. Those words, hinder and entangle, are really interesting. This was written in the Greek language, and in Greek, this word for hinder is onkos. And onkos was a mask used in Greek tragedies. And so it's not just a mask that would cover one's face, but it was a mask that would stick out and protrude. It was heavy and big, and it represented a burden that the actors were carrying, that the characters were carrying. It was a burden that they carried around. It was bulky and massive, something that you didn't want. That word is actually where we get our word for cancer today. If you have cancer, you go see an oncologist, onkos. So in their minds, it was like this tumor. Something that hindered was something like a tumor. The word for entangles is sometimes translated as circling. So something that circles you, around you, something that obstructs your way, an obstacle, something that distracts you. But my favorite definition of the word for entangle is easily surrounding. So what the author of Hebrews is saying is that you can be surrounded by this great cloud of witnesses, these people who are going to cheer for you and root you on and give you an example of a way to be victorious. You can surround yourselves with this great cloud of witnesses, or you can surround yourself with sin. Like an opponent thwarting a competitor in every direction, like in a race. Someone's in front of you and you can't get past them, or someone is deliberately trying to keep you from advancing. You can't get around the things that entangle, the things that surround you. Sin is described as having the advantage in this passage, and sometimes it seems like it does have the advantage. Sometimes it seems like it's impossible or it's hopeless. But it's not. And you can look at the example of the people from Hebrews 11. You can probably look at the example of people in this room who are part of this great cloud of witnesses too, who are showing us that it is possible to fight, and it is possible to advance, and it's possible to win. The question is, how do we get around sin? I mean, it's nice to have people cheering for us. It's nice to know that it can be done. But really, how do we keep these things from hindering and entangling us, from surrounding us and choking the life out of us? And it's a really simple solution that the author offers. And it's not an easy solution, but it's simple. It sounds simple, and it's this. Focus on Jesus. He says, fix your eyes on Jesus. Consider Him. So fix your eyes on Jesus. Consider Jesus. Think about Jesus. Focus on Jesus. He describes Jesus as the author and perfecter of our faith. And Jesus was, the agent through whom, the agent of creation. Everything that you see is here because of what God has done through Jesus. And it seems like if Jesus is the creator of life, that He would know how it's best lived. But it's not just that. He became a man like us too. He became a created being like we are. And while He was fully God, He also chose to become fully man. And while He was fully man, He needed faith. Even the night before His crucifixion, knowing what was going to happen, He's praying to God and saying, God, if it's possible, take this cup from me. Because no one wants to experience what Jesus was going to experience. Not even Jesus Himself. He didn't want to go through the humiliation and the agony, the pain, the loneliness, maybe even the fear. It required faith for Jesus to go through with that. And throughout his whole life, being fully man, that means he was susceptible to sin. He could have sinned. The author of Hebrews previously even states that Jesus was a man just like we are people. And he was tempted just like we are tempted. And it's not temptation if you can't sin, if you can't fall into it. But every single time Jesus resisted, and he is the perfecter of our faith because of that. And so if there's anyone that we should be focusing on, anyone that we should look to, it is Jesus. We need to be thinking about Jesus. And these sound so basic that, it just sounds so elementary. But these are some of the most important things that we can do to ensure that we will keep running and persevere and finish this race. We need to spend time with Jesus. We need to pray and acknowledge who he is and thank him for what he has done and for who he is. We need to ask him about the things that are going on in our lives, to intervene, to pray specifically for things, because that's a demonstration of faith when we pray. And we need to listen to him. We need to listen when we read Scripture, and we need to make it a point to read Scripture. To know what Jesus was like, to know who God is, we have to read his Word. We have to study. We have to talk about our faith and discuss it with each other. There's so many things that we can be talking about, but if we're not talking about faith, if we're not reading about Jesus, if we're not doing the things that cause us to focus on Jesus, we're just going to start thinking about other things, and those things are going to distract us. They'll entangle us. We need to surround ourselves with things that reflect the glory of God. And that's something you can control. Most of the time you can control what's being put into your mind or what's being put into your head. You can control what you hear and what you surround yourselves with. I know there are times when you can't, but most of the time that's something you control. What you think about is something you can control. But the author of Hebrews makes a good point that this is a race that's hard to finish on your own. So no matter how much you think about Jesus, you still need each other to do it. And so he says, you are surrounded by such a great cloud of witnesses. You are not alone. You're not doing this by yourself. We need each other. In Genesis chapter 2, God has finished creating everything, and after each thing he's created, he's pronounced that it was good. He said it was good. But in verse 18 of chapter 2, we find this. God says, it is not good for man to be alone. And that was the only thing that God said wasn't good. Out of everything he created was for man to be alone. So we need each other. And we need to encourage one another. And in this race and faith, when it becomes difficult or discouraging, maybe when you feel all alone in your faith, we need to be there for one another, to encourage one another and lift one another up and build up each other instead of discourage one another or write each other off. We need to pray for one another, hold one another accountable, and open ourselves up to each other and share the things that are hindering and entangle us. Share how we need prayer. And this requires us to be humble and selfless and considerate, and above all else, to love. That's one of the things that Ashley and I love most about this church and you guys, is that you love, and the important things are the important things, and the little things stay little things, or they become no things. And I encourage you to, keep that going. The things that we're supposed to focus on those. And y'all do a great job of that. And it's my hope, my prayer, that we continue to stay a place where Jesus is the most important thing. And the little things, maybe the opinions that we have, don't become big things and don't become the things that we focus on. I love here that when people have a different opinion, they don't start trouble or they don't leave and go to another place. Y'all love each other and y'all work through things, and we appreciate that, and we love y'all for that, and we're glad to be a part of this place. And it's important that we are here for each other and that we continue to encourage one another and build each other up. there's a story of an entertainer named Jimmy Durant. I think I'm pronouncing his name right, but he was big back in the 40s, 50s, and 60s. And on one occasion, he was asked to come speak at a veterans event. And he looked at his schedule, and he realized that he had a lot going on. And he told the person that asked him, "I have to be somewhere across town that night, but I can come and I can give you 10 minutes. But that's it, because then I have to go. I have to leave as soon as 10 minutes is over." So the day of the event comes, and he gets on stage, and he starts his presentation, and 10 minutes goes by, and he keeps going, and he hears people, cheering for him and applauding, but he keeps going, and 20 minutes goes by, and he keeps going, and 30 minutes goes by, and he keeps going, and finally he finishes, and he walks backstage where the manager meets him, and the manager says, "I'm glad that you stayed so long. They loved it. But you have to be somewhere right now. You told me 10 minutes. Why did you stay?" And Jimmy Durant says that I was planning on just staying 10 minutes, and I got up there and I noticed that in the very front row, in the center, right in front of me, there were two men who each only had one arm. And I start, telling my jokes, and everyone's clapping and cheering, and I notice that they're using their arms to clap. They're helping each other clap. And I thought about everything they had gone through for me, and just to get to this point where they could be sitting there. Everything they had gone through, and how much they were enjoying this. And I couldn't leave them. I couldn't. I had to keep going for them. And we need to be there for each other. If we want to finish this race, if we want other people to finish this race, it's important for us to be there for each other. They say that dining in hell, there's a table that's spread out, just a long table, and you're sitting next to each other on this table, and the food's in front of you, but you can't bend your elbows. So you can get to your food, but you can't put it in your mouth. And the thing is that they could easily feed each other, but they don't. And so, there's no future in that. There's no future when we only try to feed ourselves. We have to feed each other. Being like those veterans that Jimmy Durant sees from the stage, willing each other to clap. We need to will each other through the things that is going to require perseverance, the things that hinder and entangle, so that we can finish this race. We need to focus on Jesus together, so that we won't be of those who shrink back and are destroyed, but of those who believe and are saved, those who have faith and thus have a future. If we want a future, we have to focus on Jesus, and we have to help each other through that. So let's focus on Jesus. If there's anyone here today who wants to start focusing on Jesus, maybe you've been distracted by things in your life. Maybe you've never got to that point where you want to make that commitment that Jesus is going to be the thing that matters most in my life, and I want to follow Him, and I want to be baptized into Him. Right now, we invite you to come forward, and we're going to sing this song of invitation. And if there's anyone who wants to be a part of this congregation where we're going to encourage each other and focus on Jesus together, I encourage you to come forward too. And so we're going to sing the song of invitation.
Invitation song 493, Softly and Tenderly. Let's all stand. We'll sing verses 1 and 3. Softly and tenderly, Jesus is calling for you and for me. Patiently loving, He's waiting and watching for you and for me. Come home, come home. You are weary, come home. Earnestly, tenderly, Jesus is calling, oh sinner, come home. Oh, for the wonderful love He has promised for you and for me. No